that soon. Thank you very much. Welcome back for lunch. Thank you, Mavis, for getting everybody back in the mood here with the laughter yoga. Appreciate that. Being the speaker after lunch, that is always the primary concern for coming up here. So thank you. Welcome back. And I have two tasks today. My first task is building off and carrying forward from where I left off last year, where I had the pleasure of ending the conference last year. And I ended with this challenge, which had to do with the conversation we had about courageous educational leadership. And we had gone through a session talking about what it means to be courageous in your leadership and in your educational leadership specifically, what it looks like to accept responsibility, what it looks like to keep focused on what's important, and what it means to take action. And we had left with the challenge of you trying things out over the year. And so I know that there are people in this room doing this. And I would like to hear some of those stories. I know that in the lunchroom, there were stories around the room. That was part of the intent, to be able to share your success stories this conference. And so the first thing I'm going to ask of you is that you partner with a person or persons next to you. And, you know, look around. If you have not met somebody over lunch or through the day already, please move around a little bit in your area and meet the people next to you. And please do share. What did you do over the past year to be courageous in your educational leadership? What did you do specifically that was different as a result of being at this conference downtown last year? And what success have you gained as a result of that? Now, success to me, very loose. It might be that you're in progress here. It might be that you may not actually have seen the success as you defined it, but you've seen something or you've tried something, and that is exactly what we need to hear. And so invite you to partner up and do that. If you were not at conference last year, I know that you did do something courageous over the year regardless. So if you're thinking, well, I wasn't here, I get a pass, you don't get a pass. Please do go ahead and partner up and share your stories. Thank you. We'll give you 2 minutes for this. I fixed it.
Did you? Oh yeah, it's pretty well. Do you want the presentation on slides? Because I'm doing the summary at the end. I just so I might just get
Thank you very much. Thank you. Love the engaging conversation. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Love the engaging conversation in the room. I'd love to hear one or two people, if you would very quickly just share what it was that you did and what that success looks like at the moment right now. That would be great. Just one or two people to shout out what it is that you have done that was courageous over the last year. Raise us even now. Thank you.
Oh. So I work as residential care as an educator, and I have 14 facilities from north shore of Powell River. And And so one of the key projects I've been working on the last year is standardization of all the forms and tools that the nurses use at each facility. So getting them on the print shop, getting them so they can order them properly instead of photocopying, and getting rid of all their old forms and everything like that. And we're halfway there. We're now up the Sunshine Coast, and so it's been enlightening, to say the least. But really, honestly, I think it's made a huge difference for staff morale, because they can go from one facility to the other. They're having the same forms, everything is looking the same processes and stuff, which is making a huge difference, because the staff often work at different facilities and that, so orientation has been less, etc. So it's been a win-win situation, but a long, arduous process, and but well worth it.
And there was something from last year that helped move you in that direction, I'm assuming?
As an educator, I realized that I had to start with a common denominator. When I was educating and trying to teach about pain management or whatever, they weren't using the same tools or documenting the same way and stuff. So I really had to start with a common denominator. Soon we'll all be on the same page, and then I can start educating to that and moving them up and forward.
Thank you very much. If you would give her a round of applause. Thank you. There are a couple of hands here. I'll take you.
So I've been 9 months in the position, and the same for this lady here. So I think the most courageous thing we've done is that we've stayed.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Thank you for staying. Thank you. Okay, I think I'll move on. I know there's lots of other stories. Thank you very much for that. And so I'll pick up on that for sure. Love that. So my second task then today, as you hold those thoughts about the courageous things that you've done, is to engage with you on a journey through transformational change, transformational learning, and transformational leadership. What do those things mean? And then what are your intentions to work in that space of transformational change over the next year, over the next little while, into the future of your lives as educators? Knowing that we'll just very quickly scratch the surface of this today, and on the assumption that this whole conference today is about being a change agent, bringing this lens of transformation, because it's kind of the sexy word to use right now. I'm into transformational change. I'm working for transformation, but what does that really mean? So journeying with you today to unpack that a little bit. And why should we care? Why does this matter at all? Matters for a few very significant reasons in our context right now. We are in very complex structures. I don't need to say much more about that. At Fraser Health, at Vancouver Coastal Health, throughout the health authorities, we live in very complex structures. The problems of today, the challenges of today, the opportunities of today are equally complex. There are a myriad of solutions possible, and we need to be integrated with all of our partners in order to get to those optimal solutions that will make a difference in the complexity of the problems that we face. There are a variety of actors that we need to engage, and bottom line, human dynamics is crucial and critical in the future, in the present and in the future of our lives and our work at this stage in healthcare and generally in the world. And so that requires of us a different way of engaging with our learners, a different way of engaging with our partners, a different way of engaging with our teams all across the board. Not to say that the life of the organizational life hasn't been complex before. And however, in work that's been done on the adaptive challenges of our times, the distinction that is being made is the problems of today are complex compared to fairly technical problems previously, where you find a solution, it's a solution that sustains over a period of time, it's a solution that works. We're dealing with a different world today. And I don't need to say much more about that. In your different situations, I'm sure you can resonate with that idea. And so, in that context, you hear a lot, I hear a lot. I want more than change. I want transformation. In my work as in organization development and in leadership, I hear leaders calling for this. As educators, even the theme of your conference, educators who are change agents, everyone calling for this, recognizing that this is what's needed, that we need to not only be able to change and adapt to the times, we need to be able to lead that change and be ahead and be transformational in our work and in our practice. And so what does that mean? What does that really mean? So I'm just going to very quickly go over technically what the process of transformational learning looks like. In order to get to transformational change, you need to go through this process of transformational learning. Starts with the common technical definition is that transformational learning starts with our frames of references being challenged. And then as a result that we learn something that fundamentally transforms us, who we are as individuals. And so there's two components to that. There's the idea of habits of mind, and I like that phrasing because it speaks to how habitual our frames of references are. In the same way as we have physical habits, we have mental habits. And so we have these habits of mind that we've acquired through our socialization. We've acquired them through just our lifespan, how we've grown up, the environment we've grown up in, the assumptions that we were born into and lived into really shape these habits of mind. And so once we have these habits of mind, they're the filter through which we see the world, and then we have points of view that align with those. Those points of view, what underlies those points of views are things like judgments, our perceptions, our beliefs, our attitudes, that underline the points of view that we will speak to in our interactions with others. So, for example, for myself, I grew up in a very competitive household of 8 children, all very vocal. We love to debate, we love to compete and beat each other at Scrabble, and things like that. And so my perspective is right now, and was growing up, to be really competitive, to bring my full self and engage fully in everything that I do. And so I also had a father. Of the 8 of us, there were 6 girls, and I had a father who would say we could do anything. We could be astronauts if we wanted to. We could change the world. We could do anything. His daughters could do anything. Now, this was great for self-esteem, and so I grew up with that sort of a strength of character. Now, along with that, though, comes the other side of that. With every strength, there can be an overdone side, and that overdone side was that I would go into competitive situations or even school situations, in learning situations, with a bit of judgment that I was right. Nothing wrong with being right. I love being right. And so there was this little judgment thing that the implication of that is it prevented me from learning. It prevented me from engaging with others in a way that allowed me to learn. And so imagine my shock when I had sort of gone through most of my schooling, being a leader, doing well, excelling at everything I do, and went through undergrad and then went straight into an MBA class, having had some work experience, and encountered, I would say probably for the first time, a room full of people who were exactly like me. Now, I had grown up with that, but that was different. That's my family. I don't compete with them outside of the home. And so that was a fundamental shock to this frame of reference that I had, that, I was typically the leader and I was typically right. And I had to engage with that, and it was completely transformational for me. It's changed for me, being able to stand in going through that process of, wrestling with other people and other people's ideas and doing the hard work of trying to prove I was right and getting to the point of realizing it so wasn't worth it. And actually listening to other people and learning for them changed fundamentally who I am today. It changed how I partner. It changed how I interact with other people, how I engage with teams and the people I work with. And I can point even to the exact experiences in that MBA class that shook that worldview for me. So that's an example of how this works. And one of the greatest compliments I've had in my professional life is being approached by a colleague in the MBA class about a couple of years after we graduated, maybe 5 years, somewhere like that. And she gave me a call and said, oh, I know you were good at this particular type of work. I have this project. Would you come do some consulting to me and support me in this? And I said, yeah. So I went over and did that. I was doing some independent consulting at the time. It was great. And at the end of the project, she said to me, you know, I'm loving working with you. You're exactly the same, and you're somehow quite different. And so I was curious about that and said, oh, okay, how do you experience me now that's different? And she said, well, I remember the early days of the MBA class and just not being able to collaborate with you. There was just something there. Like, yeah. And I remember the exact simulation when that got debunked. And now I can collaborate with you, and it is so... It is such a partnering, and I had my ideas and you had your ideas, and you changed your ideas and I changed some of my ideas, and the outcome is so much better. I knew it would be better by working with you, but so much better because of how I've experienced this process. So that, just a story to share how this works, and I know you have your own experiences, so welcome to those. So here's the thing about this, is it usually takes a shocking event. Some kind of shocker. We all grow into adulthood, and then we have a normal psychological level of functioning that allows us to do what we do. And you know, as educators, you've gone through your learning, you've gone through your schooling, and you have your normal level of functioning. And then something interrupts that level of functioning, some kind of shocker, some kind of event. What's possible in that shocker is to either, you know, stay the same. There's a line that could go right through that little circle there in the middle. So we could just, you know, engage in that and go, oh, okay, I'm just going to carry on and be exactly the same that I've been. Sometimes in the cases where it's traumatic or where we're not able to cope, there could be a reducing in our psychological functioning, and that's another talk for a different day. And then there's the possibility of growth and transformation, where it is possible specifically to learn to incorporate other perspectives and to change fundamentally in a way that is productive and hopefully having positive outcomes moving forward as a result of this event. So that's just the way that it works theoretically. Now, the research shows that this is a bit of the process. If we were to outline it in a linear fashion, which of course we know that this is not completely linear. I referred to the disorienting dilemma. I just want to highlight a couple of these. I won't read through all of them. But essentially you have this disorienting event, shocker, dilemma, and then you have to work through that. There's a bunch of analyzing what's going on for yourself and critically assessing. That's the crux of what allows you to go from the shocking event to a higher level or a lower level of functioning, is that you're able to critically assess, how did I come up with this perspective, this frame of reference? What's behind it? What are those habits of mine that let me think, that lead me to think that I'm always right, or that lead me to come with a judgment of having the right answers? What is that? And in unpacking that, in simply naming that, there is potential for transformation. There is potential to do and be different as a result of doing that. I want to highlight a couple of things very quickly about this process. First is that disorienting dilemma. The way to notice, and I'm sure we've all had this experience, is sometimes it's just a bit of a discomfort. So in this framing that comes from Mezirow, he names it disorienting specifically because, you know, it doesn't have to be huge. You just feel it. You feel it here. Oh, something didn't land that well for me. I don't know what that's about. And then you can choose to engage in that and figure that out or not. And sometimes it's seismic. Other writers will specifically call it a seismic event, an earthquake, something that really shakes the roots of your foundations, of who you are, of who you believe yourself to be, etc. It's important to notice that because in the world of transformational learning, we bring all of ourselves to the possibility for transformation. So, for example, at a personal level, something that's just a disorienting dilemma is simply somebody else having a different point of view that causes you to question your point of view. And then it could be something like in the world of work that you lose a job. where you were never expecting to have lost a job. And so that's a bit more of a seismic event in your life. And so in practice, for example, there could be a small, again, somebody else with a different frame of reference in how to practice. As educators, you engage with this all the time. You have teams and two people have different ways of approaching the same situation. And so for them, as they negotiate that, they're negotiating and holding different perspectives. And then there's complete changes in practice that's sort of bigger than just, a different perspective. And you have to engage and work with that. So just to notice that there's a continuum. Regardless, the choice is, will you engage with that and see where that takes you? Okay, so that's the first distinction I want to make. The other thing is, notice number 2, this process is emotional. I know that the risk of transformational learning is in talking about it, and in the literature, it often is framed as a very cognitive thing, and the precisely being able to critically analyze and be in dialogue and negotiate that difference is what has the potential for transformation, and it is also engaging with the emotional side, which to acknowledge could, thank you, is there a bit of echo? Thank you. That emotional side has some pain to it. It doesn't make this process easy. However, all of us, as I said earlier, we are calling for transformation for a specific reason, because we know it's needed, and because in my experience at the other end of going through this emotional process, psychological process, and the pain of that, there is something glorious on the other end of it. So women who have children in the room, you love that newborn baby, don't you? You get that baby and you're like, oh, this is like the best thing in the world. And of course, there's the labor that goes before that. And somehow some of us do it again and again and again, knowing full well there's a lot of pain that comes before that glorious event. For those of you in sports, same thing. Why do you labor? Why do you train? Why do you sweat it out? Train hours and hours and hours. It is to get to that finish line, to compete and do this. Yes, I did it, right? So to get to that glorious end, I want to acknowledge there is an emotional process to it, and this can be hard work. The trick is keeping that end in sight. And again, are you willing to engage in that process? What are you willing to do to get there? So the good news is, by virtue of being in this room, you've gone through this process a lot. Any number of times in your professional career. If you're in this room, you've gone from novice to expert already. Whether you're 9 months in the educator role or 6 months in, or whether you came into this role from something else, you've had experiences of going from not knowing, of having your frames of references challenged, of realizing that you don't have the answers. You have gone through this transformational process. Being able to name it and being able to understand what it is that you're going through is the difference that makes is that it gives you access to more of a potential to learn. And this is what we want to create for our learners. This transformational space, opportunities for our learners and the people that we engage to challenge themselves and challenge their frames of references and to go through this transformational process. I want to highlight also that this isn't just about learning something new. Okay? It's not just about learning something new that just helps us be more effective in our jobs, for example. A transformational change fundamentally shifts who we are, it shifts how we relate to other people, and it changes our world view. It changes the way we see the world, it changes our frame of reference. It means that I know that I am often wrong, I am not always right, and there is opportunity for me to learn, and it changes who I am in interaction with people, different than the way I was before. Okay? As an example. And so here's the other thing about this to acknowledge. Those are my 3 beautiful children, and each one different. And so the other thing to acknowledge is by virtue of being here, not just in your professional lives, there's a piece of it. So the perspective I've been talking about with transformational learning focuses on it being learning in adulthood, that you need the mental and cognitive capacity to do it. There's another perspective that also shows in the literature that we're hardwired for this process at birth. So yes, as we go through the lifespan and through childhood and adolescence, we're acquiring the mental capacity to be able to then do this in adulthood. However, we're hardwired. At birth, we have the meta schemes that allow us to engage in meta learning. And children in specific circumstances and situations that provide those shockers early on, children are resilient enough, and they do change their frames of references in order to engage, cope, and change in the world. So by virtue of being here, you have the capacity to engage in this transformational learning process. That's the now. And the reason I put that up because I was thinking, for example, my oldest, the girl, had to engage with what it meant to be different when her brothers came along. She was no longer the only girl, the only child. That is a shocker, I would say, especially with somebody as independent as she is. And I keep getting all kind of cynical comments about the apple not falling far from the tree and serves me right and all of that when I'm fighting with that girl. Love it. So, what about your transformations? Want to hear from you a little bit, or have you engaged with this idea? If you would, again, partner with people next to you and quickly think about a transformation in your life. I specifically want you to think about two different transformations. One in your life, in your personal life, and one in your world and your work as an educator. What is a transformation? Again, something that changed your frame of reference, fundamentally changed who you are, yourself, your identity, the identity you hold for yourself, your interaction with others, and your worldview. Very quickly, I'll just give you a minute each, so 2 minutes, in partnership with someone else to have this conversation. Hold those thoughts. Hold on to those thoughts for a second, and we will come back to having you engage with what does this mean for you as you move forward in your role. So here's the thing. We, those of you who have education degrees and education backgrounds, will have engaged with all the strategies for creating transformational learning spaces. There's literature on it out there. I will have an article posted along with this around strategies for teaching for transformation. So I'm going to worry about none of that right now because there's a lot of it out there. You have, even in your current sessions, you are engaging with some perspectives that will allow you to teach for transformation. So for example, even engaging difference and differences in personalities, focusing on your spheres of influence, looking at teaching in the affective domain. Those are all things that can support and bring people into transformation. So here's what I want to focus on. And that is, from the literature and from research, including some research that I have done, the number one strategy for transformation is you. You're it. Okay? You're it. And where does this perspective come from? What the literature shows is that the use of self is a link between our personal potential and the world of change. The link between our personal potential and the world of change. Because the reality is, how you show up as educator, as you engage your learners, is going to make a difference in their willingness to come alongside you, to partner with you, to change, to learn, and to transform. And you all know this. If you're in a situation where the dynamic is not quite right, that just goes nowhere. Okay. And so this is a complicated image that I don't want you to worry too much about, except looking down at the diamond at the end of that image. Using yourself as an instrument of change has to do with a lot of what you're already doing today, so congratulations. Focusing on being a change agent, focusing on the development of others, building the competence and the capacity to do that task facilitation, that education, showing that leadership in the classrooms, the units, the spaces where you do your practice. And then there's your own growth and development that has to do with you being aware building awareness. A lot of the things that go on in those frames of reference are unconscious for us. Until we intentionally focus on them and bring them into our conscious awareness, engage in the impact that that has in the learning spaces that we're in, and then use that even to be transformational in how we show up, and therefore encourage others into transformation. The thing about transformational learning is you have no control of the outcome. All you have control of is who you are being in that and letting the process unfold. It is always a choice, and so there's that deliberate choice you'll see in the rectangle in the middle there in how you bring yourself into the space to create transformation. Invite you to quickly look at these two scenarios. The first person is a person, an educator, who came home each night in a depressive stupor, suffocating from a fear of failure. She is hesitant to share her concerns with colleagues. She found it hard to like the kids she was teaching, and she found it hard to like the jaded teacher she was becoming. The second person is joyful. She's in love with her students and excited by the kinds of challenges that used to confound her. She's eager to explore new ideas with her colleagues. She's delighted by how much she herself is learning. These two people both work in a situation where there is tons of good things happening in terms of learning and transformation. The context is an inner city school with lots of challenges in the sociocultural context, etc. And what if I told you that those two people were the same person? The time span between those two statements was a year. And in that year, this was her response to the question. The question was actually, how is this place different from other schools you've been around? And her response is, actually, this place is not different. Because a year ago, I was person one. What's different is me. And, just in responding, in the image of how she responds, what happens for her right away is that she clears her throat, she stares at the floor, and she starts to cry. And she's crying because even though there's boarded up houses, there's struggling stores, there's streets with broken glass, there's drug dealers around the corner inside the school, she's crying because she's trying to explain how happy she is for the transformations that they're affecting in the lives of those students every day. Okay. What's different is her. And so what I love about this perspective, leadership from the inside out, transformation that starts with using yourself as the instrument of change, is that you have 100% control over how you think, and you have 100% control over how you show up in interactions with others. And that was the singular shift when you go through that research for herself and a number of other people and organizations that they looked at where transformation was happening. It had to do with people showing up fully, 100% open to think differently, be different, willing to innovate, and willing to show up differently as a result of the community that they had created. And so you have access to this. What supports it is, of course, being in a transformational community of practice. That can absolutely support it, and it is not essential. So we know this looking at those leaders in our times that have stood out. They've been the deviants, they've taken a stand, and then eventually the community of practice follows. Anybody who's your hero in history you can think about. For myself, I easily think of someone like Nelson Mandela, stood alone, and he had a whole community behind him eventually. And yet, there is a place where you make that choice about whether I want to use myself as an instrument of change. And so, what does this require? So you and transformation, our minds change our behavior, and our behavior changes our outcomes. In everything that I've said, I hope you've already seen that. It requires radical authenticity. It requires following those emotions, those disorienting dilemmas, and it requires engaging your own resonance. And I'll talk about that very briefly in a minute. Actually, each of these I will go through very quickly. So the first one, you and authenticity. What does it require of you to use yourself as an instrument of change and transformation? To be that change agent requires authenticity. It requires a love for the world and for the people in your educational space. It requires humility. It requires faith in people and in their power to create and recreate themselves. You do not have control over that, but it requires that you have faith and trust that that is possible. It requires hope that the dialogue will lead to meaning. Central to transformational learning is that ability to critique and to engage with others in those differing perspectives. And so you can hold the hope that the dialogue will lead to meaning and just let it unfold. And we've already talked about critical thinking. I want to give you an example of this. So this is easy enough to say. It requires that you do this for the people out there. And what we're talking about is you. You being also authentic with yourself. An example of this for myself is I teach a course at SFU in organization development and change. And recently, it's a very interactive class. I hold these principles of transformational learning in teaching this class. And so recently we're having a class and we're engaging with these ideas of judgment and how we come to our judgments and how we can recognize those things and transform our thinking when we come to a situation with judgment. And you know, I'm going through the motions. You know, judgment is not a bad thing. It lets us clue into what we're thinking, and how we engage with it is the choice, etc. And as we're going through this, one student who has said nothing, I think the whole class, or maybe even the class before, pipes up and says something along the lines of, yeah, and this whole process to me is a process full of judgment, or something along those lines. And so I engaged with that and said, okay, you know, what are you thinking behind that? And then just moved on with the class. Didn't think much of it. There was a little niggle there maybe, but I didn't think much of it. Fast forward a couple of days later, I'm marking their papers. In this class, you do not get to do a critical assessment or analysis or case practice. You do that in business school every other class. And I warn them when they come in, you need to do a reflective learning piece that's both critical assessment and bringing your effective learning. Talking about what's up for you, what are you experiencing and why, and how is that changing your perspective. So this was their first reflection paper of this sort. And I'm marking and I'm going through the motions of feeling happy when someone puts forward a really reflective piece that shows how their learning is unfolding. And, you know, worrying when I see people on the edge and, you know, holding for myself, okay, I don't have control over that. This is the point. This is the exercise. And I realize I hit a paper and I feel a sort of hardness in myself. All of a sudden, I've moved from soft emotions to sort of hard emotions. And I realize I'm being really hard on the paper. And I realize it's this girl. And I'm shocked by this. Because I'm thinking, oh, am I mad about that comment she made in class? And why? And what that did was really rub against my frame of references and who I believe myself to be. I have a huge value for fairness, and recently I did some work around engaging with what we're passionate about by going to both negative and positive emotions. So there was a question like, what disgusts you? Deliberately go into negative emotion to look at what you're passionate about and see how you can transform that into something useful. And what I had on that list, one of the things I had on that list was use of power to dominate others. And so I'm looking at this going, am I just about to use my power as the lecturer, as the educator, as the person in front of the room to mark this paper harshly because of this comment? So I put the paper aside and I worked with this for a little while and I marked other papers. And I am happy to report that I went back to the paper and marked it very fairly based on the criteria I had for every other student. And she did have a good grade. And that's not because I also had this experience. I can rationally go through why she had the grade that she had. So I felt better about that. And then I did some work with myself. Okay, so I'm going to class. What do I need to do to be different? When I thought about it, I realized because she had been so silent in class, I have a value, remember, habits of mind, about how you show up. That if you show up and you have a different perspective, you do it in a way that engages others and moves things forward. And my experience of the way she had brought that comment was that, oh, you say nothing and now you show up like this? Okay. So I didn't go there when I felt the niggle, but that's what went on for me. So my habit of mind, my judgment was that she did not show up, came from my habit of mind that it doesn't matter if you're quiet. It wasn't about her being quiet. It was about the way that comment came. So my work was, I'm going to go to class, and I'm going to be authentic with myself. I did think this. It gave me compassion to that thing that I have abhorrence to, which is I am equally capable of using power in a way that's not useful if I'm not attentive to myself. So did that work. And then I decided, okay, so I am going to be open. I am going to hear her. She is here to learn. She wants to transform. I thought differently about who she is, etc., and all of this. And I went to class, and first thing I noticed is by break that day, I was not being triggered at all, or by anything she was saying. And she was saying a lot of stuff this class as well, some that I would have considered not showing up and some that I would have considered showing up, but I wasn't even worrying about that. That's the first thing I noticed. The second thing that happened, which I can't scientifically put back to this, but I'm pretty sure had a lot to do with it, was that she came to me at the break and she said, I have a question. I had to do with something that you said that doesn't fit for me with my thinking on this issue, and I just wanted to explore it with you. And we engaged in the most beautiful conversation that showed me that she was, in fact, engaging in transformational learning. And in fact, that's not my judgment to make. That's her choice, remember. But the only thing that was different is I had been different in my interaction that day with her in class. Okay? Authentic with myself, as much as I call for authenticity from others. And then there's emotions. The pain, the pain, the pain. So this is me when I go crazy with research and trying to theme. My default when I'm extremely emotional and tired is to go to sleep. And my dear children decided to take a picture of me. A crazy mom trying to make sense of the world. All this to say, just go there. So at the end of all this emotion and pain, and I'm tired and I don't want to do this, and okay, I'm going to go sleep and maybe it will go away by the time I wake up. No, it doesn't go away. So then I wake up and keep pushing around the post-its, etc., and go through it. And at the end, come up with something useful and meaningful. And myself, I am changed in it because I have learned some things about how I think and how I don't think, and how that needs to make me different in the future. So nothing much to say about more. And then there's this one, you and resonance. In some research that I've done looking at transformational learning, the idea is to go to the extreme cases. So looking at people who've been through more of those seismic type events, traumatic events, war events, and going, and yet they're identified as people that are transformational leaders and transformational in their worlds. What is it that creates that for them? And talking to them again, it was all about this, bringing myself as an instrument of change, changing me first, being the change I want to see in the world. And to a person that I interviewed, the core of it was that they have these resonance moments. These are moments that are both moments where they critically engage with what's up for them and emotionally engage with what they're feeling. It is not that original sort of discomfort. It is more when you're already in the process of thinking about what was this for me. They come to a point of insight, and it's more than insight. It is that moment where they are changed. It's that moment where they think differently and they decide to be different going forward. So when you have those moments where all of a sudden you're getting an insight, catch it. And then think about, okay, what does this mean for how I am, how I think different, or how I'm going to be different? Okay? I'm going to close with a couple of quick things for you to think about. One is having a community of practice helps this process. So I'll invite you to look around, look at who's in the room. You're not alone in this work. Here's one level of a community of practice that you have, and I'm sure you have many others. Okay? So as you're going through these processes and you're going through the emotion of it, remember you're not alone. I'll have these slides up, and I want to throw out a challenge for you to work through going forward as you go through your other sessions today and as you go forward. What is an educational challenge that you have? Educational challenge situation that you have? Maybe it's somebody that you're working with where you seem to be going nowhere. You have those blocks, you have that sense, you have that disorienting dilemma, something's not working, you have that niggle. What is possible if you saw that person or group as, and I invite you to put opposite as the way you see them right now in that blank? What different mindset do you need? And how do you need to be different in that interaction? Something to think about. These will be posted. And in 2014, what is your transformational intention for your educational practice? How do you see yourself? And how do you see your learners as you go forward? And in doing this alone, I would put forward that there is transformational potential in that for yourselves. It is possible. Thank you for having me.